Welcome to another Explainer. Today, we're diving into a monumental paradigm shift, a total revolution in understanding that completely transformed human health and our very odds of survival. We're going to trace the ultimate invisible war, looking at how humanity went from blaming sickness on mysterious vapors and out-of-whack bodily fluids to finally discovering the microscopic killers hiding right under our noses.
Okay, so just imagine this bizarre reality for a second. What if something we do every single day, literally just washing our hands with soap and water, was once considered a radical, entirely mockable idea by the world's top scientists? It sounds absolutely absurd to us now, right? But the journey to figuring out why we need to wash our hands, well, it was paved with tragedy, intense stubbornness, and eventually some undeniable scientific brilliance.
Which brings us to Section 1, Bad Air and Bodily Fluids. To really grasp the magnitude of this shift, we have to understand the dogmas that ruled medicine for over 2,000 years. Ancient doctors, dating way back to Greek thinkers like Hippocrates and Galen, basically had two main explanations for why we get sick. First, the humoral theory. This argued that your health relied on a delicate balance of four mysterious fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you were sick, your fluids were just out of harmony. The other idea was the miasma theory, which blamed diseases like cholera or the Black Death on inhaling miasma. That's essentially foul, poisonous, rotting air coming off swamps or decaying matter. And because their foundational theories were so completely wrong, well, their treatments were completely misdirected. If a doctor thought you had too much blood, they would literally drain it right out of you with brutal bloodletting. They used aggressive purging, forced diets, all just trying to magically restore this imaginary fluid harmony. These treatments didn't just fail, they often caused way more trauma to an already suffering patient. Medicine was, for all intents and purposes, flying completely blind.
Section 2. The Tragic Savior of Mothers. This brings us to a desperately dark era of medicine and the really tragic emotional anchor of our story, a Hungarian physician named Ignaz Semmelweis. Back in the 1840s, the Vienna General Hospital had this absolutely terrifying discrepancy. In their first clinic, which was run by doctors and medical students, the maternal death rate from childbed fever was hovering around 10%, and sometimes it spiked up to almost 16%. But over in the second clinic, run entirely by midwives, mortality was just 2 to 4%. The doctor's clinic had such a horrific reputation that pregnant women would literally beg on their knees not to be admitted there. Some even purposefully gave birth in the streets to avoid it. Semmelweis was just heartbroken and completely puzzled by this. He systematically ruled out everything: overcrowding, the climate, even whether a priest was walking through the ward. But the mystery was finally unlocked through a terrible tragedy. A good friend and colleague of his died after accidentally getting pricked by a student's scalpel during an autopsy. When Semmelweis looked at his friend's autopsy, the pathology was identical to the childbed fever killing the mothers. Suddenly, it all clicked. The doctors and students were spending their mornings dissecting rotting corpses, and then, without washing their hands, walking straight into the maternity ward to deliver babies. They were unknowingly carrying what Semmelweis called cadaverous particles. They were literally transferring death from corpses directly to mothers. Midwives, you see, didn't perform autopsies. So in 1847, Semmelweis took action. He forced the doctors and students to scrub their hands with a chlorinated lime solution, basically a really harsh bleach, between the autopsy room and the delivery room. He picked chlorine just because it covered up the putrid smell of the corpses, and the result? A massive 90% drop in mortality in the first clinic. By the summer months, the death rate plummeted to 1 or 2%, totally matching the midwives. For a 2-month stretch the following year, the death rate was literally 0. Now, you'd think Semmelweis would be celebrated as a global hero, right? No way. He was fired. The 19th century medical establishment was deeply offended by the idea that the pristine hands of upper-class gentlemen doctors could possibly be unclean. His ideas completely contradicted those entrenched miasma and humoral theories. This sparked what we now call the Semmelweis reflex, the automatic rejection of new knowledge just because it challenges the status quo. Semmelweis was mocked, pushed out of his job, and eventually driven into a severe mental breakdown. He was committed to an asylum where he was brutally beaten by guards, and he tragically died from a gangrenous infection, the exact same type of blood poisoning he had spent his entire life fighting. Section 3. Proving the Invisible Enemy.
Semmelweis's observational evidence just wasn't enough to change the world. Medicine desperately needed undeniable proof that these microscopic killers were real. Enter the scientific detectives. The first huge blow to the miasma theory came from a British physician named John Snow in 1854. During a terrifying cholera outbreak in London, Snow didn't look to the skies for bad air. He looked at the hard data. He statistically mapped the cholera cases and traced them straight back to a single contaminated water pump on Broad Street that was pulling in sewage from the River Thames. By simply removing the pump handle, he helped stop the outbreak. Snow established modern epidemiology right there, proving cholera spread through contaminated water, not poisonous clouds.
But at the time, people still believed in spontaneous generation. That's the absurd idea that life, like maggots or microbes, just magically popped into existence out of rotten meat or spoiled broth. French microbiologist Louis Pasteur set out to crush this myth once and for all. He used these brilliant swan-necked flasks that let air in but trapped dust and microbes in the curve of the neck. The nutrient broth inside stayed perfectly clear. It only spoiled when the liquid physically touched the trapped dust. Pasteur definitively proved that germs don't magically appear out of thin air. They are physical entities that travel to colonize and infect us.
Section 4. Koch's Rules of Disease.
So Pasteur proved germs existed, but it was a German bacteriologist named Robert Koch who gave us the actual instruction manual for catching them. In 1884, Koch established 4 rigorous steps, Koch's postulates, to definitely unmask the specific culprit behind an illness. Step 1. Find the microbe in every diseased host, but not in healthy ones. Step 2. Isolate it and grow it in a pure culture. Step 3. Infect a healthy animal with that culture and watch it cause the exact same disease. Step 4. Re-isolate the identical microbe from the newly sick animal. Using these strict rules, Koch successfully linked specific bacteria to terrible diseases like cholera and tuberculosis. It was a complete game changer.
Now, while Koch's postulates were absolutely revolutionary, we know today that nature is a bit more complicated, right? It breaks the rules sometimes. Take viruses, for example, which weren't even discovered until the 1890s. They need a host cell to survive, so they can't be grown in a simple pure culture. We also know about asymptomatic carriers. Think typhoid Mary, where the microbe is there but the person isn't sick. Plus, some harmless bacteria only cause issues if a patient is immunocompromised. So while Koch gave us the crucial foundation, we've had to update his rules for 21st century science.
Section 5. The Modern Medical Revolution. This absolute shift in understanding, going from bad air to microscopic pathogens, it didn't just win academic arguments. It revolutionized the world and changed human life expectancy forever. Armed with Pasteur's germ theory, a British surgeon named Joseph Lister finally realized why so many bone fractures ended in fatal infections. The open wounds were exposed to environmental microbes. So he started applying carbolic acid directly to surgical wounds and equipment as an antiseptic. The results were staggering. He dropped the surgical death rate by an astounding 45.7%. Surgery went from being a terrifying, often fatal last resort to a genuinely safe, life-saving practice.
Just look at this domino effect. In a matter of a few decades, humanity fully transitioned out of thousands of years of medical darkness. From Semmelweis desperately pleading for hand-washing in 1847, to Snow mapping the water in 1854, Pasteur proving germ travel in 1861, Lister sterilizing surgery in 1864, and Koch formalizing the rules in 1884. This sequence literally represents millions upon millions of lives saved. The big takeaway for us today is that almost everything we rely on was born from this hard-fought paradigm shift. Once we finally knew what the enemy was, we could actually fight it. This led directly to sterile surgery, the massive engineering feats of modern sanitation and clean sewer systems, targeted vaccines to train our immune systems, and eventually antibiotics to hunt down bacterial infections. Precision medicine completely replaced blind guesswork. It's an incredible journey from tragic ignorance to scientific illumination. But, it also serves as a really stark warning about the stubbornness of human belief. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question. If the smartest, most highly educated doctors of the 19th century violently mocked the simple idea of washing their hands, what life-saving truths might we be completely ignoring today just because they challenge our current assumptions? Think about that. Keep an open mind, and I'll see you in our next explainer.